Hey everybody, welcome to Mostly Acoustic, and today we're certainly going to be mostly acoustic. I'm here with my old friend, one of the greatest guitar players in America, the great Jack Lawrence. Hey Jack.
Hey Michael, it's great to see you here in the confines of my living room.
Well, it's great to be here in your home. Been here many times, spent a lot of fun hours in this room. What is this you're playing here? I recognize this guitar, but the audience may not know right off.
This is a 1940 D28. It's a player's instrument, but it's...
I tell you what, it looks great too. The original tuners with the covers, 39 and 40s, had the covers on the Grovers. Got that.
Grover G111s.
Yeah. It's a great guitar. You have a lot of great guitars. We'll get into that later. Let's start out. What's your first memory of music?
My first memory of music, well, it's not really a memory so much as it was a reminder. My father took me to see Flat and Scruggs when I was about 3 years old.
You remember that?
I don't really remember it, but I've been told so many times about it that I feel like I have fond memories of it anyway. But, after that, probably just, hearing my parents, playing long play records on the hi-fi.
Right. Plus, your dad was big into radio. Jack's dad was a radio and TV repairman back when they had those sort of things.
Yeah.
But he was big into radio, wasn't he?
Oh, huge. When he moved to Charlotte after World War II, after he got out of school, he knew most of the radio people in town, at the radio stations. And back in the 50s, there were still, WAYS still had a live broadcast.
Well, Charlotte's got a lot of radio history, WBT and all the acts that played through, the Monroe Brothers, on and on and on, so yeah.
Sure. Well, Carl Story had a show on WAYS radio.
Right.
And so all the acts that were passing through town would come and play a spot on that afternoon radio show that Carl had. Flat and Scruggs, Bill Monroe, they had shows in the area. They would stop by, and I think that's where my father met most of those people, because he knew where all the live radio shows were being broadcast, and he would just go in, and he knew people, so he'd go in and sit there.
A big part of your history, especially in country and bluegrass and acoustic music, comes from many nights spent at the Lake Norman Music Hall, right?
Yeah, starting when I was around 10 years old or so. My father, can't really call it a job, but he did work very hard there, trying to whip their sound system into submission.
I remember the story you told me was they were having trouble with it one night. I walked out and said, "Does anybody here know anything about this stuff?"
That's pretty much how it came about. So my dad eventually, rewired the whole stage and, did the best he could with what he had to work with.
So you got a lot of memories of hanging around backstage with people like?
Ernest Tubb and the Texas Troubadours. I was a big fan of their band, especially when Buddy Charlton was the steel player, and my brain is not engaging, but a terrific guitar player as well. I saw everything from Flat and Scruggs to Ralph Stanley to Bill Monroe to Jerry Lee Lewis, George Jones, Porter Wagner, Dolly Parton. They all came through this music hall when I was growing up.
When and why did you decide, I think I could do that?
I'm not really sure. I started, my first remembrance is pulling a guitar out from under my father's bed, and I'd never seen it. It looked like a strange suitcase to me. And I pulled it out, and there was a guitar in it in this case, and I would sit there. I couldn't even. It wasn't really even big enough to take it out of the case. I would open the case and sit there and just strum the strings with my thumb. And when I was about 10 years old, I figured out that I could actually get my hands around the guitar neck somewhat. And my dad showed me G, C, and D, bought me a pitch pipe, and
we all started right there, didn't we? C, G, and D, yeah.
C, G, and D, a pitch pipe, and a Mel Bay chord book.
There it is, bud. It's up to you.
And the rest was kind of up to me. And so, by the time I was around 12 or 13, I was starting to get proficient enough to play with other people, and and I was, not on some singular route with this, because I was playing anything from the radio, like, Little Red Riding Hood, and
Sam the Sham.
Sam the Sham, and
from Sam the Sham to Earl and Lester.
And then, like I said, my folks had a pretty good record collection, and seeing Flatt and Scruggs on TV every Saturday was probably what pushed me into thinking I could do it.
Yeah.
Especially, watching Earl Scruggs play guitar.
Yeah.
I was always interested in guitar for some reason. Maybe it's because it was the only instrument there was in the house, but I've dabbled with a lot of other things.
You're a fine 5-string banjo player. He'll say, "Oh, I don't know anything about it," but you ought to hear him. And you're a great mandolin player. But okay, so I remember you and I were on tour somewhere. I remember somebody, maybe in Texas when we went out there. Somebody asked you, "How did you learn to do all that?" And you said, "I went in my bedroom when I was 14 and came out when I was 17," or something like that.
Something like that's what my mother always said. Yeah, he disappeared into his room when he was about 13, and he came out when he was 17 and he could play.
Yeah.
And
the first time I encountered you was at Camp Springs, and I don't know. I guess you were playing. I don't know if you were playing with New Deal yet, but I know you were hanging around with Frank Greathouse. And that would have been 71 or 2, maybe something along in there.
Well, I had known those guys for a few years because I worked for a fellow named C.E. Ward in his instrument repair shop, and all those guys from the New Deal string band brought their instruments there. So for about a year and a half,
You're younger than most of those guys.
I'm younger than most of those guys by 6-7 years.
Yeah.
And so. At Camp Springs in 71 is where I didn't audition for the band so much as they decided they wanted to have me come into the band, which I did about a month after Camp Springs in 71.
Well, that was a big year. It was a big year for guitar players there. I know there were some pretty phenomenal people showing up. You and Tony Ross and just a lot of great players were coming up then. What I assume that you were like most of us who were trying to learn to do something with a flat pick on an acoustic guitar. You were listening back then. There was Doc and a few other. Don Reno played some lead and that sort of thing.
George Shuffler.
George, of course, was playing cross picking those tunes with the Stanleys, but it's obvious you sat and listened to records and formed your own ideas from that. But you listened to a whole lot of music too, didn't you?
Sure. I discovered Doc, and had his first record. Then I went back and got the old stuff with with his family, and with Fred Price and Clint Howard and Clarence Ashley, and listened to that too. And I just, I got pretty good at guessing where to put the needle to
Right.
hear the solos. And I just, hunt and peck and, put that needle back and until I could get it close. I mean, I never tried to get it exactly note for note.
Well, that's the thing. You
Um,
you have your own style. You don't sound like anybody else. I know right away when I hear your guitar playing that it's you. But we all had our inspiration, and being a songwriter, of course, Guy Clark and those guys for me. But then you pretty soon realize, well, they've already got a Guy Clark and they already got a Doc Watson. Let's see
yeah.
who
Oh,
Jack Lawrence
exactly.
is. Yeah.
Exactly.
And you put in tons of time before that. I mean, New Deal was, you guys went to Atlanta, played underground Atlanta.
There was Atlanta,
You playing, what, 6 nights a week? 7 nights a week?
six nights a week, 6 sets a night.
There you go. Folks, that'll hone your chops for you, I'll tell you.
I was only when that was going on. I was about 20 years old, so
Yeah. So, yeah.
I could do that.
Yeah. Stay up that late and do all that other stuff, too. Okay, so you and Joe Smothers, you guys were a duo for a while.
We were a duo for a while. I had been in and out of the Charlotte area for a number of years, mostly out. With a New Deal string band, and then there was a house band in Nashville, and I was in Louisville on a couple of different occasions. Once with the Bluegrass Alliance,
Right.
and then another stint up there with a fellow named Jim Smoke, banjo player that played with Monroe back in the 50s.
Yeah, a lot of people recognize that name.
So I came back. I'm trying to figure out where I came back here from. I came here from South Carolina. There was a short-lived band for about a year with my friend Al Osteen.
Al Osteen, yeah.
And
Another
Larry
old
Jefferson.
Chapel Hiller guy from that scene out there, right? Didn't Al hang around out there too with a lot of those guys?
Well, Al was from South Carolina, but no, he did hang out with those guys.
Yeah, there was.
And he had been on the scene for a while, playing with Jim and Jesse.
We talked about it. You'll see it if you see my interview with Tommy Edwards. He talks a lot about Jack in those days. That whole sort of Chapel Hill scene, we call it that, is where so much where a lot of young people got introduced to bluegrass, and it's where a whole lot of what later on became referred to loosely as newgrass, where a lot of that sort of started. People Jack's age and my age back then, finding out that the first rule is there ain't no rules, right? So if you want to play Love Potion number 9 with a bluegrass band, you can.
We did it, yeah.
You did it. That's right.
Yeah, we did it.
So, how did you get the call to sit beside Doc Watson?
Well, Joe and I, get back to your previous question, I had met Joe. As a matter of fact, I had seen him play with the band he had with T. Michael Coleman when they were still in college at ASU. The band was called Fried Chicken and Watermelon. Don't know that you can get away with that name anymore.
I don't know. I like both of them.
But anyway, that's where I first remember seeing Joe from. So I came back here after having been gone for 7 years, 8 years, something like that. And one of the first people I met was Joe, and he Doc had just disbanded the Frosty Morn band.
Right.
So
Joe was a part of that.
So we had this rock and roll band together called Buddy Row with Lenny Federal and a couple other guys.
Yeah.
And after that ran its course, we started doing a duo. Well, through Joe, I met Merle Watson. And, we did Joe and I did opening acts for Doc and Merle in Atlanta and around here, and, regionally we did some work with them. The partnership with Joe was coming to an end, and, Merle would always come and sit in with us with a rock and roll band, or Joe and I were playing somewhere, he was always around. So I got to know Merle. And I guess he had heard that Joe and I weren't going to be working together too much longer. And I got a phone call from Merle out of the blue on a Friday afternoon, asking me what I'm doing on Saturday, the next day.
Yeah.
I told him I was planning on mowing the grass, and he said, "Well, I can get you out of that." So he hired me to go and do a job up near Chicago with Doc and T. Michael.
T. Michael Coleman.
And so that started it, and I just didn't go away after that.
Well, a lot of people, I've heard this too. A lot of people have the misconception that Merle died in his tractor accident. They needed somebody, but it was actually Merle who hired you, wasn't it?
It was Merle had hired me, and I worked with Doc for about 2 years prior to Merle's accident.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people don't know what that timing is. I'm glad we got to talk about that a little bit. So there's a whole piece of your history tied up there, of course, sitting beside Doc Watson for a quarter of a century at least.
Yeah, I think I figured it out to be right at 27 years.
Yeah. So you've played in every great venue in America.
And some really bad ones.
And some really bad ones. Well, you guys kept moving up. I'll say that. But yeah, I mean from Mud Holes to Lincoln Center, huh?
Oh, yeah. I did Carnegie Hall a couple of times, but also did Bully's Big Country in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
That's right.
Bully's Big Country, yeah. The mirror ball over the dance floor. And,
sure.
Yeah. Thick cigarette smoke and a lot of Navy personnel.
Was Doc still playing through guitar amps back then?
He had already, by the time I started working with him, he had stopped using the Fender Twins.
Yeah. I don't know how many of you go back to the early Doc and Merle Watson days, but those guys it was on their rider that there was 2 Fender Twins, and for those of you who don't know what Fender Twins are, go look them up. It's about like carrying a rhinoceros with a handle on its back. But anyway, so you did all that. You played on tons and tons of great albums over the year, but of course that's not all you've done. Recently, for instance, you've been doing shows with Peter Rowan.
Yeah, and that's been fun. Again, that just kind of happened because I had met Peter years ago, and of course we worked at Merle Fest together for a bunch of years. And
your Merle Fest is coming up.
It's coming.
How many
up.
times have you been there?
How many times have they had it?
That's right.
I can't
Jack
remember,
is
but all of them. Yeah.
One of the few people who was at the first one and has been at every one. It's coming up in April.
End of April, last week.
And you'll be back again.
I'll be back again.
I know a lot of people looking forward to that.
Yeah, well, there are 5 of us that have played every single Merle Fest. Besides myself, that would be Sam Bush, Peter Rowan, Jerry Douglas, and Joe Smothers.
And Joe, that's right.
And so for the past, this will be I think the 4th year. Time gets by, I'm not sure. It's 4th, maybe the 5th time we've done it. But I produce a set that is done on the main stage on Saturday about noon, and it's the Merle Fest Veterans set, and it's all those guys, Sam and Jerry and Peter and myself, and that's been fun. And so out of that, and Peter had called me a couple of times to do duo things with him, close to here. And then a couple of years ago, he was working on a record called Carter Stanley's Eyes. And so I went to Nashville and played guitar on that record. And then subsequently, the last 2 festival seasons, played a good many festivals with Peter and his band.
You've recorded with so many people. David Grissman is an old friend of yours too.
Yeah. Doc and I, actually, the Doc and Dog record came from after dinner jam sessions in his studio.
Right. It's in the basement of his house.
At that time,
dinner, a little wine, and let's go down to the basement and fix it, boy. Oh, by the way, somebody hit record.
Yeah. David said, let's go down and jam in the studio. And he'd just gotten the studio put together in the basement of his house from the old equipment from the Arch recording studios. And when I went down there and I saw Decibel Dave Dennison, his engineer,
You think?
this is maybe going to be a little more than a jam session, but in all actuality, it really was a jam session. We didn't do multiple takes on anything.
Right. Just
We
laid it down.
We just played songs, and a lot of them were songs we never. There was half of that record we'd never played together, and so
Well,
in
when you
about 5 years,
when you get that caliber of musicians together, you can usually pull it off.
And since then there's been a couple of releases of some live shows. There's one from Hickory, North Carolina, with Doc and David and myself, and there's another one from Watsonville, California,
Watsonville,
where the mayor declared it Doc Watson Day in Watsonville. So there's that, and also worked with Grisman and Sam Bush on their record called "Hold On, We're Strumming."
Yep.
So yeah, I've had the pleasure of.
So you played with Sam and Dave, didn't you?
I played with Sam and Dave.
Well, such a great career, so many places you've been, so many great people you played with. But one of the things I think we need to make people aware of is your teaching. You've done guitar workshops all over America and overseas.
Yeah. I've never really done private lessons.
Right.
But workshops at festivals, and I haven't done very many lately as far as the guitar camps are concerned. But I've done Steve Kaufman's camp a couple of times. I did a camp in Slovenia with Beppe Gambetta.
Yeah, great guitar player.
And there was the thing in Nashville, the Swannanoa gathering.
Yeah. People come from all over the world.
Yeah. I'm not a great teacher, but I can show you stuff.
He's tried to show me stuff for years. I can't make it stick.
I have a hard, because I'm a hands-on ear player.
Right.
And so I know what it sounds like, but explaining how to do it kind of
just tell people to go in their bedroom for 5 years or something.
Yeah. No substitute for time behind the box.
No, that's it for sure.
Behind the box.
That's it for sure. Well, it's wonderful to see you. Don't get to see you as much as we used to. You see you every week.
Yeah.
But we're all off in different directions so much. But it's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us into your house.
Oh, I'm glad.
We're going to let Jack play you something on this old 1940 pre-war herringbone guitar.
Oh gosh.
And I'll get out of the way and let you have it.
It's early in the day.
That's all right. We can edit. Get him.
I ain't got no use for that red rocking chair. Ain't got no honey baby now. Ain't got no honey baby It's all I can do, and it's all I can say. Ain't gonna be treated this way. Ain't gonna be treated this way.
Folks, this is your old buddy Michael Reno, Harrell here. Thanks again, Jack.
Glad to do it.
Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Mostly Acoustic.